right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little after 11. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Pena. I'm a marketing specialist for Verity IT. Today's webinar will be covering the evolution of co-managed IT services and how it can positively impact the success of your business. Today, we're joined by Mike DePalma, a Senior Channel Development Manager at Datto. Mike specializes in connecting with business owners and IT professionals to educate them on current cyber threats and the role business continuity plays in combating these threats. He frequently presents alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. So I'll get started. So again, my name is Mike DePalma. I'm the Senior Channel Development Manager at Datto. So we are a backup disaster recovery company based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. As Liz mentioned, my job here at Datto is basically to go around and do these educational seminars, sit on panels, those type of things. And a lot of the stats and the stories specific to the co-managed IT idea come from governmental agencies. They come from different studies that we've been a part of. And so, hopefully, as we go through these, a lot of these will be something that will apply to what you're talking about. And so when we look at the idea of co-managed IT, it's relatively new in that, basically for years, the IT space has been broken up into two buckets. You had the folks that handled everything in-house, and then you had the folks that outsourced completely to a managed service provider. So folks like Verity, right? We have seen a real growth in this idea of a managed service provider not coming in to replace anyone, but instead supplement that. And when we look at especially the chaos that happened over the last 15 months, that collaboration really did help businesses get up and running faster as they worked remote or worked in a hybrid environment, and then also advanced the protection in terms of cyber resiliency with some of the things that they're doing. And when we look at just specific to the COVID-19 response, and then we could expand it out to really any sort of disaster, there's really 6 stages that every business goes through, right? The crisis emerges. You think back to March of last year, it came on very quickly. And so that first kind of transition to phase 2 was just employee safety, right? Beyond technology, let's make sure everybody's safe. But phase 3 is really where IT came into play. And how prepared were you, and how quickly were you able to pivot and get everybody all the tools that they needed to continue to be productive and be protected? And depending on where you stood at that point, that could have been a pretty painful transition. If you were not prepared with company issued laptops and devices like that, there was a huge supply chain issue there. And so that slowed things down. And when we looked at what criminals were doing, is they were exploiting that. And they knew there was so much low-hanging fruit there that the folks that were not prepared were getting attacked at a massive rate. And knowing that, hey, this person's working from their kitchen on a personal laptop, but still has access to critical business data, these are the prime candidates to get attacked. And so as we went through the phases and we got to that, okay, clarity of some sort of return to work, and then we're moving into that transition, and depending on where you are, it looks pretty differently. But in Connecticut, we're getting back to that new normal, right? I mean, I think one of the things that we found with this acceleration of technology, the idea that we accelerated 10 years of technology in a matter of 10 months out of necessity, a lot of these things are here to stay. The online collaboration tools, the way that we monitor different things, the way that we monitor devices. Nobody calls my cell phone anymore. They send me a Teams meeting. They send me a Zoom invite. This is the world we live in. And I don't think we're going to go back because companies made so many investments. So what that means is that data lives in so many different places. People are transitioning back and forth to work, and we're seeing this new kind of model, that hybrid model. The 3 days, 2 off, those type of things. I know a lot of even office buildings have changed their layouts. And so we all have to pivot for that. And, the managed services community has been living this life for, the last 30 years since its existence, really. And so there's a lot of great insights that take place in order to work in collaboration. We do every single year a ransomware specific report. This is the world we live in, and we talk to managed service providers as well as folks from the small business community to try to get some of our own stats. Obviously, there's great third-party reporting out there, but we want to confirm that with our own reporting. And what we saw was obviously an uptick in attacks on the healthcare industry last year. what industry had more pressure on it in 2020 than the healthcare industry, right? And it shows you how opportunistic these criminals are. That's why we saw emails very early on in the pandemic that looked like they came from the CDC, the World Health Organization. Hey, click here for cases in your area, if you have these symptoms, all of the rest. And they were getting success, but they're going to go and they're going to attack whatever industry has pressure on them. I can tell you right now, as hurricane season approaches, they're going to focus on the Southeast. There's inclement weather in the Midwest. They're going to go and they're going to attack that. So any form of kind of vulnerability, they're going to exploit. But it also shows you that every single industry is vulnerable to these attacks. So it doesn't really matter where you are located or the size of your business or even the industry that you're in, you're vulnerable to these attacks. And so it's very critical to start to pivot and start to understand where these threats come from and understand how you could protect that. Because ultimately, the consequences from these attacks is not the risk of losing data. It's the loss of productivity. It's the ability to make sure that you can stay up and running. And that's a real piece where the managed service community has been in that world for so long. The idea of continuity of operations. We all talk about cybersecurity, but the real question you need to ask is how resilient is my business? Yeah, you want to put everything in place to protect yourself on the front end. But if you watched FBI Director Wray testifying on the floor of Congress a couple months ago and getting grilled, rightly so, about the attack on the US government, he was very open and honest. And he said, there's nobody that could look you in the eye and say you are 100% protected from the attacks that are happening right now. And more importantly, the attacks are going to happen tomorrow. So the idea then is how quickly can you detect that an attack has occurred? And then how resilient are you in terms of how quickly you can get back up and running? And one of the things that we've seen here is that explosion of cost that this downtime really shows. You look at the pipeline attack. What was the real impact of that attack? It wasn't the fact that they were never going to get their data back. It was the speed in which they were able to get their systems back up online. That's why I'm still paying $3.30 a gallon for gas here in Connecticut. It was that length of downtime. And a recent webinar I did with the Department of Homeland Security, they gave a stat that said that the average length of downtime for a business that's attacked by ransomware is 16.2 days. So this is the concept of cyber resiliency. How resilient is your business to not just get that data back, but truly get back into a production environment? That's where we need to look at in terms of combating these threats. And, when we look at that cost, I can remember 2018 reporting on the stats, right? $4,300 was the average ransomware ask. The cost of downtime 10 times higher. Look where this cost has gone. That same Department of Homeland Security panel I sat on, their number for the average cost of a ransomware attack was $1.6 million. Ours was over 300,000. We were focused on small businesses, but depending on how transactional you are, or the size of your company, that gets into the seven figures very, very quickly. This is the leverage that the criminals have. So as a whole, as a company, when you start to think about your cyber resiliency plan, this is what you really need to look at, is how quickly can we get back up and running? This is the reason why so many people pay, because they want you to do that math. Say, pay me this ransom, or go ahead and have the downtime and come call me in 2 weeks when you're still down. And oh, by the way, that $5,600 just became $56,000 because we know the impact that this has been happening. And so this is the question we need to answer. At a minimum, one of the things that co-managed model allows you to do is to get that second set of eyes on there and try to answer this question, the question of your recovery point objective. How much data are you at risk of losing? Is that aggressive enough? Who's monitoring that? Are those happening automatically? Are they being tested automatically? Is there geo redundancy there? And on the resiliency side, that recovery time objective. Backups are only as good as the speed in which you can recover them. So when you start looking at that cost, how long would it take you to get everybody back with access to everything they need for you to service your clients, to get back into production if you're a manufacturing company? This is the real impact. So that co-managed model allows you to work with a third party to start to understand those questions, come up with a comprehensive cyber resiliency plan. There's a lot of benefits to having a plan in place. With anything, it's people, processes, and technology. So if you don't have complete buy-in, all the great technology in the world isn't going to help you if you don't have that complete buy-in. And putting together a plan, especially working in conjunction with folks like Verity, really allows you to do that and get buy-in from every department. Take an inventory of where all the devices live, where all the critical data lives. and then put that into a plan that's adjustable. When you look at cyber resiliency, this is not a product you just go buy off the street and say, hey, we made an investment into cyber resiliency, here we are. There is no product that's going to allow you to do that. A lot of great vendors, but it really does come down to putting that plan together, making sure all these systems integrate. There's a lot of great things on the front end. We've got machine learning that's trying to detect these attacks from occurring, but it's always with technology. Okay, what happens if that fails? What happens if that fails? Go down that list of that multi-layered approach. Because when we looked at the businesses that were attacked, 6 and 10 of them did have anti-malware filtering in place. They did have endpoint detection in place, AV. They were doing a lot of these things, but it's not the end all be all. That's where cyber resiliency comes into play. And that's where cyber, business continuity and continuity of operations comes into play. And we know this is an issue because when we talk to business owners specifically about ransomware and how concerned they were, 7 in 10 were not very concerned about ransomware, despite the fact that we saw this spike in attacks last year. The scary part about that is last year, that number was 41%. It came down, it went in the wrong direction. And so it's showing me, as somebody who goes out and does this education, obviously I take a little bit of a personal offense to it because my only job is to educate folks on this. But it shows me that, there was a lot of chaos last year. Businesses were just trying to keep their doors open. Maybe security took a back seat. Criminals love that. They also love this number because they know 2021 is going to be a great year because businesses are still doing the same thing that they were doing 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago even. And they know that they have evolved so aggressively in terms of how they're getting in and what those viruses can actually do that they know this is going to be a great year. And unless we can all get that number to start to rise, we're never going to win this battle with them. This is where co-managed IT really comes into play. It's that idea of the education, putting a plan together. And so what it is it's that working in that conjunction with another folks, some outsourced folks, to say, okay, there's certain things that we know we can do, that the regular operations, the regular IT operations, but there's some things we need help with, and we need to figure those out. And, sometimes there's not resources available. Sometimes, you look at that and you just don't have as many resources as you need to put together a full plan. It's also evolving so quickly. I spent a week last week at a security event, and it was amazing kind of walking the vendor floor, even watching the presentations, how many new vendors, security vendors are out in the space right now. Great vendors with great technology. You work with a managed service provider, they are able to vet all of these folks. Instead of going for the shiny new object that might have the best marketing materials or the best sales rep or whatever that might be, it's actually taking a dive into what this technology is. Where does it fit? How does it service the client? And then how does it integrate with everything else? Where does it fit into my cyber resiliency plan? Instead of cobbling things together. I saw this, I think we need this, let's go get this. All right, how do you manage it? How do you educate everybody as to what they need to do? I talk about people, process, and technology. You could put all these great technologies in place. If those 3 pillars are not in place, all the great technology in the world isn't going to give you that true cyber resiliency. And then a lot of times they're less protected because of working with MSP. They're more protected because they're working with MSPs. They're less protected now because they're trying to cobble all that together. And we're looking at those types of things. So we did an actual study looking at the small business community and how they manage their IT, because it was very important to us. And so we asked 1,100 business owners from around North America to get a real good pool of what is happening right now in the industry. And we started out with, all right, let's just talk about the threats out there. How many of you folks have lost revenue due to IT? Clearly, the numbers are pretty large. We're looking at a third of the businesses essentially that we talk to have lost revenue due to IT. So again, when you start to look at cost of what it is to put these, in place, the real question is the cost of not being able to do it. Because what does this start to cost you? Do we start to look at that $300,000 number, that $1.6 million number, even just traditional downtime, a hardware failure? Go and look at the supply chain right now and tell me how quickly you can get a new server into place and those type of things. And so when we look at lost revenue, even just that idea of those 6 phases, that transition into phase 3, how quickly we were able to get back up and running and servicing your clients, there was lost revenue there if that was something that was painful. But when we looked at the folks that were working with a managed service provider, this was a very surprising stat for me because we're channel only, so I only work with managed service providers. And what we found was the folks that were working with some form of outsourced IT, the majority of them, 6 in 10, were working in a co-managed model. So it kind of flips that contract, that concept of either outsource or in-house on its head and saying, no, actually 60% of them do have in-house IT folks that worked in conjunction. We saw still about 4 in 10 that were outsourcing it only. A lot of times that we're at those are at the smaller level, but one of the reasons why we're seeing that concept move up market is because that education needs to be there, that putting together these plans. And so that was a very surprising stat for me, as somebody who lives and breathes this stuff. And we looked at the challenges that business owners told us they had. Clearly, security issues were number one, right? Tech support, challenges of increased cost. We get that. The compliance issue is something I think is going to start to rise as well. If you notice, the government's, and specific to ransomware, the government's always pretty much said publicly not to pay the ransom, embolden these folks on a macro level, and all the rest. But now what they're doing is they're actually putting out official statements. The Treasury Department put out a statement in October of last year saying that you are at risk of violating the law by paying a ransom payment. Ransom is not illegal to pay. If somebody steals my dog, I could pay ransom to get it back, and that's not illegal. But the problem is a lot of times the folks behind these attacks are terrorist organizations. They are enemy nation states. So by paying that ransom, you could inadvertently be, funding one of these organizations that's on the terrorist list. What that means, and what it shows you, is the direction that the government is going in. If you go and look at GDPR over in Europe, that will eventually become the standard over here in the States. And it's coming over here on a state by state basis. But what all these regulations are doing, and believe me, I'm in the Northeast, so we get regulated to death, is they're not helping to catch any of these guys. They're not helping to even prevent the attacks from happening. What they're doing is they're shifting that burden over to you, saying, hopefully you survive one of these attacks. But if you do, you better be able to slide a piece of paper across the table when we come knocking on your door to show that you didn't pay the ransom, show what those remediation processes look like, and what you had in place prior to make sure you had all the due diligence in place to make sure your data was protected, your client data, and all the rest. And so the benefits of putting together that plan, that comprehensive plan, is not only to be able to hand that over and make sure that all the check boxes are there on the compliancy side of things, but also as we see a rise in cybersecurity insurance, if you're able during the underwriting process to show that here's who we're working with, here's what we have in place, it's going to be the smoker or non-smoker. Are you a high risk client of theirs, or are you a lower risk because you have those positions in place? Again, the co-managed IT model helps with all of that. And when we look at company size, we start to see the typical trends. The outsourced only typically happens at the smaller level. We saw co-managed start to rise, but we do see folks diving into that co-managed model, even in the smaller space, even in smaller office sizes. That has been the trend. And when we look at how long this has occurred, this shows you the acceleration. Because when you look at how long folks are outsourcing their stuff, the outsourced only, you could see it. It's been going on for years. I mean, 40% of them have been working for 5 years or more with a managed service provider. But take a look at the co-managed cohort there. 29% of those businesses that are working co-managed type IT, they weren't doing so a year ago. That's is where we saw the trend really pick up pace last year. The idea is, hey, we know we had some pain points last year. We need to address those. So, this is the acceleration. I'd be very curious to see when we do the report this year. I guarantee that number is increasing only because of these conversations that I'm having with businesses and managed service providers. This is where the trend is happening, and there's reasons for it. When we look at the satisfaction of how folks are managing their IT, the least satisfied were the internal IT folks. The next in line was the outsourced IT. The most satisfied were the co-managed IT folks. The folks that had that relationship with an outsourced IT folks, but also maintained an internal team as well. So we look at that 94%, we're at least somewhat satisfied with that. And it really accelerates what we're talking about here. So everybody has those pain points. And sometimes folks look at IT as this cost center, right? That really shouldn't be how you're viewing IT. It really needs to be a driving force in how you stay productive, how you save money on the back end, and all the rest. And so this is really where businesses are turning to. And so when you look at what these relationships look like, and they're all different. Again, this is not a cookie cutter. Hey, I'm going to come in. Here's the services I do. Here's the services you do. It really is a customized approach. And there's things that model does to help accelerate a lot of these relationships. understanding you're a target. And it sounds obvious, but I just showed you the statistic that only 3 in 10 business owners are highly concerned about these. Because you read the stories about the pipeline, that insurance company down in Atlanta that paid $40 million in ransomware, the hospitals, municipalities. And business owners tend to look at it two different ways. One is, well, why are folks going to focus on me? Or you throw your hands up and you say, hey, what chance do I have? But go back and do some forensics on those attacks. Go take a look at the pipeline attack. There were gaps that could have been filled on the front end as well as the back end on that cyber resiliency side. Why did it take them a week to get all their systems back up and running? Why didn't they have a continuity plan in place to at least get their systems up and running? It starts with understanding that you are a target. I go back to policies and procedures. Extremely critical for various reasons. One, you're going to take a look and see if you have any gaps there. You're going to get the buy-in. And I include, when you're putting together these policies and procedures, I'll go ahead and put together a task force internally working with a managed service provider. So you get the buy-in of all the departments, because a lot of times departments aren't necessarily talking to one another. They don't even know what SaaS applications one department is using or who has access to that. Within those policies and procedures, it goes down to, all right, does everybody have access to the tools they need to be productive? But more importantly, do they only have access to what they need to? I see all the time businesses that are handling things on their own, carte blanche, give everybody admin access to everything because it's easier. That's a big problem, because if you get somebody gets through, that's more systems that virus can go migrate to. So that's all in those policies and procedures. And to be honest, IT has almost become a prescriptive style process in terms of, IT is not, okay, I could save you a little money here, I can make you a little more productive. No, it's the same as going to the doctor and finding out you have high cholesterol and the doctor saying you need to go on this medication, you need to exercise, you need to lose weight. Ultimately, it's your choice whether you do it or not. But it's not a question of, hey, it would be great if you did this. It is, you need to do this to lower your cholesterol. And however you want to get that done, go ahead. It's the same thing with cyber resiliency. Putting those policies and procedures will put that on paper and say, okay, am I meeting these? Am I checking off all the boxes? And if not, here's what you need to do. You could get to that endpoint in a lot of different ways, but that's where the speed in which you can do that is very critical. And so policies and procedures, if I were to say one big takeaway, is that is where you need to focus. And again, putting that together with a third party that comes in and does this and lives and breathes this every single day is critical. Now, the ongoing employee training, critical as well. I mentioned the people, process, and technology. If you're not doing those trainings, then I could tell you there's going to be gaps there. And I'll give you a real life example. I did a recent webinar with a partner who gave an example of a new client that they had. Prior to, they were handling everything in-house, and they implemented multi-factor authentication, something that eventually will be the law of the land. When I sit down here at my computer every day, type in my credentials, I get a ping to my phone, facial recognition, I'm in, right? Super simple. Well, this company did that, and it's great. The very first week they implemented that, the CEO of that company was at home. It was a weekend. They're at home with their family. And he gets a little alert on his phone. Did you just try to sign in? Clicks yes. Doesn't matter what the technology is. You've just let them in the door. And it's because they didn't go through the training. CEOs don't want to sit through mandatory training. And so again, all the great technology in the world doesn't matter if you don't have buy-in and an understanding from everybody within your organization. This is where the co-managed model comes in. It's like anything else. You listen to a third-party expert on it, you tend to listen a lot more than you do to a buddy that happens to be your IT person down the hall. The password management access of this, I still see to this day people with sticky notes as I'm talking to them, behind them, or if I'm going to a in-person visit, sticky notes on their laptop with their passwords. You go back to that, if you remember the bomb scare they had out in Hawaii, where they thought a missile was coming their way. There was a guy there was the person who was the villain, and then there was the hero. I'm the one that saved it. And he has front page on the USA Today, his picture, he's got his monitors up. This is the in-house IT person, the expert. You zoom in and he's got his password on a sticky note on his monitor. We still see it all the time. And there's some scary stats about password management. If you have an 8-digit password with all letters, they can crack that in a millisecond. A 16-digit password with numbers, letters, and symbols, you're looking at 70,000 years before they can crack that. And they're going to move on to the next piece. So that password management is critical. There are great tools out there to do that. But we see that all the time. The number one password 5 years ago, password 1234. Now it's probably some sort of similar password. Maybe it's got an ampersand or an exclamation point. That does not slow these guys down at all. So again, putting that together, when you look at policies and procedures, password management, multi-factor authentication needs to be there as well. When we looked at that third phase of the work from anywhere environment, we saw people now working from home. I have got 2 little kids. I had the remote learning. It was difficult. But when you think of leaving devices unattended, I used to live on the road, right? So I worked from Starbucks all the time. I was always amazed, people leaving their laptops open when they went up to get a cup of coffee or went to the restroom, or worse off, went out and took a phone call. You don't know the person sitting next to you, and you're on an insecure Wi-Fi network. We saw the same thing at home. If I left my, I don't think my kids are going to do anything nefarious, but they like Minecraft, they like Fortnite and all the rest. They get a hold of my computer and they start going down a Google rabbit hole. How do I know what they're clicking on? And so understanding it in terms of your policies and procedures, doing that inventory, if there is critical business data, even if it lives on a personal laptop, it has to be something that's secure on the front end. It's all backed up, and it could never be left unattended. Only folks with access that need access to it should have that. And then understanding, what to click on is really the key here, right? I mean, that's where they're getting in. 93% of the downtime and data loss is because of user error. I'll go back to that 30% number. If a business owner is not highly concerned about this and has not created that culture of security, you're going to see a high percentage of click rates. There's great training tools out there. At Datto, we've got a tool. I get fake phishing emails all the time. And on my job, I'm supposed to forward it over to our IT team, and they give you a thumbs up, congratulatory email. You spotted our phishing email. Good job. If I do click on whatever that attachment is or hyperlink, I'll get another congratulatory email. It says, congratulations, Mike, you just enrolled yourself in an hour-long training, because clearly you haven't been listening to us, right? These are the type of things that co-managed model allows you to do. You guys on the IT side focus on what you need to do, but the training, the tools in place up front, all those password managements, you work in conjunction and find those gaps and figure out really where that co-managed model can work. Obviously, the AV, malware protection, it's one piece of the puzzle. 6 in 10 of the business owners that we talked to in our ransomware report that were attacked did have those in place. As I mentioned, they had all these endpoint detections in place. So understanding that that's one layer of a larger approach, and it's evolving so quickly. As our technology has evolved, so have the criminals, clearly. And so we sit there and we're doing all of these great tools, whether it's Microsoft 365 and all these great things, those are being attacked as well. So understanding the multi-layered approach, backups are critical, right? I mean, and that goes kind of without saying. But the key part of this, again, is as data started to migrate over the last year, where does that data live? Does it now live on a remote desktop somewhere where it used to always be on that shared server? Well, that data needs to be backed up comprehensively, image of that entire server. Microsoft 365, Google Workplace, that data needs to be backed up. There are ransomware variants right now that are attacking those. And you could go look at stories in the news. You could look at our ransomware report. We're seeing that. A lot of people just settle on, okay, the only attacks occurring on on-premise Windows-based servers. Very true. Most of the attacks still are. That's because most of the critical business data still lives there. As they saw the explosion of the software as a service applications, they started to follow that. And so every place that critical business data lives, it needs to be backed up. It needs to be continuously tested and reported upon. Because again, when you go back to your policies and procedures, or if you're going to, if you are attacked and the government comes looking, they're going to want to see those reports that your backups have not only been occurring, but that they've been tested as well. This is where you can really start to work together. Put a mobile device policy. There are, we think of phishing. There are also tishing attacks with a T, texting attacks. They're finding ways to get access throughout a lot of different places, understanding all that. And then also understanding your people, as simple, as kind of cheesy as that might sound. Working with a managed service provider allows you to do that. A lot of times people don't want to be the squeaky wheel. They don't want to say, hey, I don't have access to all the tools I have, especially as we were going through the last 12 months where everybody was just paranoid about their job. So that's where you go on, you take a comprehensive look at everybody. Again, making sure that they have access to all the tools that they need. They're educated on that. They have buy-in to it. Everything is being protected. But again, they only have access to the tools that they need to have in order to be successful. This is one of those things to look at and get that second set of eyes on there. Do a debrief on what all these policies are, understanding what department has access to what. how folks are vulnerable, and how do we address those problems. So it really does come down to, at the end of the day, when you start to think of a cyber resiliency plan or working with a third party, you think of the cost of it. A lot of these things are going to be essentially free because they're part of that solution, that all-encompassing solution, that front-end piece of really creating that culture of security. But I will say, based on the numbers that we talked about, based on the fact that we've got a great turnout on this, we are heading in the right direction. This is how we win the battle against these criminals. This is how we stay productive. This is how you stay more competitive against other folks in your industry. Again, this is not just a cost center. This is something that can drive your business and can be a real competitive edge in terms of what you're doing versus what your competitors are doing. So it really is a mindset shift of technology. Cybersecurity has now moved into the cyber resiliency space. Backup has become business continuity. The IT space, we're seeing that trend towards the co-managed IT model because of the satisfaction, because of the gain actually of productivity within that organization that actually makes this more cost effective. Within that study that we had, 85% of the businesses that moved over to a co-managed model found out that this was actually a more cost-effective way to handle their IT. And so these are real hard numbers showing where the trend is. And I believe that number is going to continue to increase. And this is really the future of how businesses are going to handle IT. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. Obviously, any other questions, you could reach out to Liz and their team. And at a minimum, I would suggest just having some form of network assessment, kind of figure out what you have. Is that sufficient, and all the rest. But I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions? Or Liz, you can monitor the questions, see if you have anything coming in.
Yes, I actually had a couple come in the Q&A box. I'll shoot them your way. The first one is, does every MSP offer a co-managed solution?
No, actually, there's a lot of folks that are a little slow moving for it. And I do a lot of training for the managed service community to try to encourage them based on these stats. And the reality is they don't. And so I know you guys have a strong relationship on the co-managed IT model, so you're kind of ahead of the game there. But no, unfortunately, they don't. And so it's important, if you are vetting managed service providers, make sure that they understand that co-managed model and they're not coming in and saying, here's my managed service package, take it or leave it. It really is understanding what that relationship looks like.
Perfect. And then the second one is, I own a small business, only 7 employees. Does it make sense financially for a co-managed solution, or should I stick with an internal or outsourced solution only?
Well, it's hard to answer without understanding the environment a little bit more. But I could tell you that for the most part, every single business can benefit from that co-managed model. Understanding where that is. Even if you think about trying to add on another IT professional to your staff, it's way more cost effective to work on a third party with that. And so it's worth that discussion either way. Because maybe you don't. Maybe it's something that you are handling in house and everything is fine. The vast majority of conversations that I have, folks find out that it's not only cost effective, but it makes you more productive, makes you more secure. And so I wouldn't give it a definitive 100%, but I have found very little businesses, regardless of size, that have not found benefit in working in a co-managed model.
Perfect answer. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Mike, so much for presenting. You did an amazing job per usual. We would just like to invite everybody to our next webinar, Overcoming Your Biggest Security Risk, Your Employees, which focuses a lot on security awareness training, which Mike covered today. We will reach out with an invite and, of course, the list of our other upcoming webinars this year as well. Thank you so much for everyone for joining, and we hope everyone has a productive day.
Thanks, everybody.